Hello everyone. Our next guest today is Marg Anderson, and if you've played with her, I'm sure you've heard some of the funny stories that she's told about her role as a doping control officer. Anyway, I thought you'd all love to hear her stories, and so we're going to start off today. Marg, what's your role we're chatting about, and how did you get into it?
So my role is I'm a doping control officer with Sport Integrity Australia, which was formerly, until the beginning of this year or halfway through last year, the Australian Sports Anti-Doping Authority. Back in 1989 was when the agency was first started, and that came about as a result of the government suddenly being aware that there were athletes out there doping. So everybody knows about Ben Johnson back in the Seoul Olympics. So I was very fortunate enough in my capacity as a phys ed teacher and looking after a state schoolgirls netball team that I came across and became friends with a counterpart in Canberra. And at the time, she was applying for a position with the newly formed Australian Sports Drug Agency. Her job then became to go around Australia and set up different places where we could go out and test athletes that lived in the capital cities and major cities. And because of our connection and what became a friendship, she asked me if I'd like to apply for the position, which I was fortunate enough to win. So from then on, I've been involved in the various stages of this organisation, and it's changing the way it's changed over that number of years. It's been a fantastic journey.
I'm sure. So where has been the most exciting place you've had to do this role?
There's been lots of exciting places. It's given me the chance to travel. So I've been to Korea, to South Korea, and tested in Seoul. I've been to Beijing. I've been to Noumea, London. But I guess the most exciting place, and most Australians who've been involved in this would say, the Sydney Olympics. It was just a fantastic opportunity. The friendliness, the way our athletes performed, and all the volunteers. It was just a fantastic experience.
An amazing atmosphere too.
Absolutely,
and camaraderie.
absolutely, yeah.
I was keen to know what sort of type of tests do you do? I mean, because I know you've told stories about urine tests, but is that the only one?
No, at the moment we do urine tests and blood tests. Our charter says that we can do hair tests as well, but we haven't really moved into that area. In the main, we do, depending on the type of athlete and what the lab and the agency is looking for, we do so every test is usually a urine test, but sometimes there are blood tests as well. I'm not a trained phlebotomist. I can't take blood. So we have people that come in and that we contract that come in and do that for us. Yeah.
And are they always athletes that you perform them on, or is your patient index wider than that?
No, it's only ever athletes that we perform those tests on. However, the charter of this new Sport Integrity Australia is that if we suspect that there are coaches or friends, acquaintances of athletes who are doing the wrong thing, supplying athletes with drugs or preventing us from going and working with an athlete and taking a sample, then there is the ability to, take them to court. Yeah. And they have to, prove their innocence, I guess. But in the main, so my role is actually working with athletes, but if I come across some intelligence, then I'd have to report that and it gets moved on from there.
Yeah. Sure. What's been the most scariest time in your role?
Knocking on a door and being confronted with a python wrapped around an athlete's neck would be the scariest.
Where was that?
Are
you allowed to say?
No, it was an athlete that I'd tested before. He was a boxer, and I had tested him previously at a gym, And then this particular afternoon we went to the house and obviously he didn't know we were coming, and when we knocked on the door, he appeared with this python wrapped around his neck, and I just went, I'm not going here, and we left. And that was the end of that. But there's been a couple of other athletes around the place who keep creepy crawlies, slitherers in their houses. So I prefer not to know where they are. So, for example, we've got one world-class athlete here whose house I go to sometimes, and I've said to him, just don't tell me where they are. I don't want to know.
Oh my God. And what about some of the funniest moments?
There aren't a lot of funny moments, but things have happened like, so the very high level athletes have to actually put in what's called whereabouts. And so they have to nominate an address of where they are able to be tested for 1 hour a day, every day. That doesn't mean we turn up every day. It just gives us access to them. And so they can, if we turn up at that, so say they nominate the time between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the morning. If we turn up at 6:30 and they're not there, they actually can come home at 1 minute to 7. So we have to sit outside and wait. So sometimes that's what's happened, and we've had to do that. We have a black uniform. So when we're sitting outside somebody's house, we actually look like the police. And so we've had a few people come and, peer into the car and ask what we're doing and why we're there, because they think that we might be on surveillance at their house, whereas we're actually just waiting for this athlete to appear or not.
Yeah.
I think other times it's happened where it's not scary for us, but we've knocked on a door to an athlete's home and say the mother or the father has answered the door, and because again we used to have this black jacket, we've changed it now, and it had a badge on it, and it had a government badge on it, and people would think, oh no, my son or daughter is in trouble, or if they're not home, that they've had an accident. And so we very quickly have to explain, no, we're here to do a drug test on them, because they're an elite athlete.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think we've had too many other funny instances, because the athletes all know that they have to comply.
And you have to watch them while they're doing a urine test, do you?
Yeah. So it's sleeves up, jackets off, pants down to your knees, and then we have to watch the stream coming from the body.
Right.
It's confronting for everybody. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I still don't enjoy doing it. But we've had instances where females have had condoms with somebody else's urine in it, and they've used their fingernails so they've inserted the condom. They've used their fingernails to break the condom, and into the beaker has come somebody else's urine. And it's been proved that it's somebody else's urine because they've used genetic tests. Or people love hearing my story about the male version, which is to have a fake penis and somebody else's urine is inserted in that.
Oh
and
my goodness.
So when they produce it, out comes somebody else's. And so that's why we have to watch.
Yeah. Goodness me. People will go to any lengths, won't they?
Well, there's another story of a girl in South Africa who actually, we don't know how she did it or why she did it, but she injected somebody else's urine into her bladder.
Oh my God.
And that's highly dangerous, because if it had actually not gone to where it had to, she could have had a really severe infection. But that's the lengths that athletes have got, sometimes go to.
That's astounding.
Yeah.
Is there, coming a bit closer to home to golf now, is there any drug testing done in major golf tournaments?
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, watch out, everyone.
So I've actually tested 3 events here in Adelaide, 2 here. So the first one was when they had the World Amateur Championships here, and what was actually happening at the time was golf hadn't been put into the Olympics, and the RNA and the USPGA had to put in a submission, and part of that submission, when any new sport goes into the Olympics, is they have to have a drug testing policy. So I worked with them in formulating or updating their policy, and then we tested a few athletes here. And then probably 2 or 3 years ago, I tested some of the boys who were competing in the state championships, national championships here, and the girls I tested over at Glenelg.
Right.
It's actually, if you look in our handbook, it's actually written that golfers can be tested.
Right. There we go.
And if I was going to Tokyo, which I'm still not sure about, but one of the sports that I wanted to test there would have been golf.
Golf.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, terrific. And what's next on the agenda for you?
Well, I'll keep going because I love the job. I'd like to go to Tokyo. We're still debating that. I'd have to go into 14 days isolation before I get there, or before I start working, then work for the duration of the games, and then 14 days when I come home. That's 2 months out of my life, which isn't a lot. But I think in the circumstances that it's a tough call. Otherwise, I'll just keep doing what I do because I love it.
Yeah. Fantastic.
I love sport, and my whole life has been sport. And I have a philosophy about clean, fair sport, and that's why I got into the job in the first place. It's always going to be a battle because there's always people who think they can beat the system, but the system at the moment is hard to beat for the reason that with urine and blood samples, we have the ability to be able to store them for up to 8 years now. And what has actually happened is that we've tested athletes around the world. Athletes' samples have been tested retrospectively, and they've been found to have drugs in their system because of the advance in science. So Jared Talent, our walker here, he was one that was fortunate enough to be awarded a gold medal after the London Olympics because they'd tested the Russian winner after the games, a few years after the games, and found that he had something in his system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Good luck, Mark, and thank you for all the interesting stories. It's a really interesting area that I'm sure not a lot of us have had exposure to. So thank you for your time.
My pleasure.